Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sacral Circle, where we are healing sexual trauma collectively and lovingly. I'm your host, Janie Terrazas, and I'll be interviewing women from all walks of life who have had to face a sexual tragedy or abuse in one form or another and triumphed over their adversity. On every episode, a guest will deliver inspirational support, words of comfort, and empowering healing advice. They'll courageously share how their experiences impacted their lives and what led them to face and conquer the blockages that kept them from fully reconnecting to their inner power and divine feminine sacredness. Be sure to visit my website, JanieTerrazas.com, for more information on my coaching and healing services, and subscribe to the Sacred Stories podcast on iTunes. I want to thank our listeners for joining us today on the Sacral Circle, the self-love haven where we leave judgment at the door. And today I'm grateful to have the lovely Nidia Valadez. She is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas and is trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. For the last 5 years, she's been helping children, teenagers, and adults overcome traumas, anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. She's worked in a variety of settings, including a children's shelter and a psychiatric hospital. She recently worked in a children's advocacy center where she counseled children affected by abuse, mainly sexual abuse. She wanted to help them heal and move forward with self-confidence. Nidia now owns a private practice in San Antonio, Texas, and continues to help survivors of trauma overcome their past. To learn more about Nidia and her services and to read her inspirational blog, visit NIDIAV, as in Victor, .wordpress.com. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, and I know we spoke briefly just a moment ago, but you are so sweet and offered the listeners, those that are local here to San Antonio, that you would offer them a special rate to assist them with the cost.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So I know there's a lot of people who really need the help, but unfortunately they're not covered by any type of insurance. And usually counseling is very expensive, especially for trauma, since you have to do many sessions. So my usual rate is $150 per session, but I'm going to be offering a discount to those who mention the Sacred Circle. So I would lower my fee to $50 per session.
That's so kind of you. And, you know, most of the individuals that, you know, end up doing this type of work and helping people with trauma, oftentimes they dealt with trauma themselves. And I know you have a really interesting life story because you actually grew up in Mexico, and I believe you were a teenager, correct, before you moved here to Texas?
Right. I was 14 years old when I moved to McAllen, Texas. That's where I did my high school and my undergrad. And then after that, I moved to San Antonio. So there's a lot of different things that happen in my life, not only sexual abuse, but just transitioning to another country in itself was very hard.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that in terms of the transition and just some of the things that you had to face and overcome, like challenges and obstacles. And then I think you had mentioned, too, that the trauma, the sexual trauma that you endured was prior to you moving here to the States.
So I guess I'm going to start with the sexual abuse since I was very little and it happened multiple times. So I think one of my first memories, and I think it's true for a lot of sexual abuse survivors who were very young, one of my first memories was actually being molested. So I was living in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. It's bordered to El Paso, Texas. And my parents got divorced when I was around 4 years old. So that was another trauma. So a lot of I didn't recognize the word traumas until I started going to graduate school for counseling. So now I'm able to recognize that. But my parents getting a divorce was a trauma for me. My family was very close. Even though my parents didn't have a great relationship, it was, you know, a marriage and it was a family. So when my parents got divorced, my mom they got married very young. So my mom kind of started, you know, going out and drinking. And I remember one time she went to visit one of her aunts, and she let me go and play with her older son, which I believe he was around 17 years old at that time. So I remember him molesting me, and I was very scared. And one of the reactions that kids have when they're sexually abused is they freeze. So you don't know what to do. You just kind of stare to space. And now I understand that that was my reaction. They usually call it fight, flight, or freeze response. And for me, it was definitely freeze response. So I remember just kind of staring to space, and I never told anybody. So then that happened, and then other things kind of started to happen. And, you know, when you start growing older, you feel that shame because you believe that it was your fault. I must have done something for them to do that to me. So I remember when it happened the second time, it was a cousin of mine. Mm-hmm. You know, I just felt so ashamed. I felt scared, but I felt ashamed. I felt like I'm doing something, and that's why it's happening. Mm-hmm. So I always kept the abuse hidden for many, many years. I believe my mom just recently found out about it, maybe like 6 months ago, because that shame was still working its way inside of me. So, you know, those two things happened, and then I remember my mom would drink a lot, so she would leave us, you know, with my grandma or with my aunt. But I remember a specific time when she picked me out from my grandma's house, and she was with some friends, her boyfriend at the time, and then her boyfriend's friend. They were taking him to his house, but I was sitting in the back, and I was in the middle. So he was to my left, I was in the middle, and then my brother was to my right. Mm-hmm. So he started touching me while he was sitting next to me. And again, I just froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So all those little instances, they just kind of, you know, started to build that shame and started growing roots inside of me. So every time something would happen, it would just make my shame worse, and I just became very anxious, a very anxious girl. I was very, very shy. I wouldn't make friends easily, but I would never trust them. And, you know, that continued to happen until, you know, I think I still have some trust issues. I'm trying to work on that.
Right.
But it is very hard because the people that, you know, they're your family. I mean, it was my cousin, it was my mom's cousin. And the people that are supposed to be there for you, they're supposed to help you, right. To help you grow a healthy person. They're the ones hurting you.
Yes.
So how can you trust people who are not even related to you?
That's a lot of what this ends up doing to people, you know, and they don't ever really make the connection sometimes until they either, you know, seek out therapy or maybe listen to something like this or, you know, read a book, and it starts to open their mind to what's potentially like living on the inside.
Right. And, you know, I think one of the things that really helped me is that my dad has always been a very loving dad. Mm-hmm. He didn't really know what happened other than a situation that happened at his house. One of his friends molested me, and he actually went into the room and lowered my panties. And that's one of the flashbacks that I used to have a lot. I used to dissociate even when I was driving. I used to, like, it would just come into my head. It was what we call an intrusive memory. And I would be driving, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about it, and I would just dissociate. And I would get to school, or I would get to my apartment, and I would be like, how did I get here? I don't remember driving. But that's, you know, one thing that happens too. If you don't deal with it, it's going to just come to your head because it's trying to find a way to heal. And if you don't pay attention to those signs, then you're not going to live a fulfilling life. So I had my dad was very, very nurturing, and I think that was one of the things that, without him knowing, it helped me to move forward and understand that I had value, that what happened to me didn't define who I was. So now I'm going to get into moving to the United States. So
Yes.
I had I was 14 years old, and I had a boyfriend, or if I can call him a boyfriend. I think he was more of another perpetrator. He was 22 years old, I believe, at the time, and I was 14, and I was in middle school. So he was very sick. For what he told me, he had a brain tumor. And I remember getting out of school. It was like the last week of school. And I remember getting out of school to go see him to the hospital. And my mom kind of knew about him, but she thought it was just a friend. She didn't approve of me having a relationship with him. So when she found out that I was skipping school and that I hadn't been in school for a whole week, she decided to talk to my dad. And they decided that I was going to move with my dad. So in a way, that was a relief for me because my mom had a lot of issues after they got the divorce. So by this time, they had been divorced about 10 years. But she was still struggling with that. So for me, it was kind of, okay, I'm going to go live with my dad. I'm probably going to have a better life. So I moved to McAllen, Texas with my dad, and I started going to school. But I started fainting at school. And I remember the first time I fainted, they took me to the nurse's office. They had me there laying down. My aunt, thankfully, she used to be a custodian at the high school where I was at. So they called her. She took me to her house where I ran out of her house. I tried to choke her, which I don't remember most of the things. But my dad got home, and they took me to the ER, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with her. They did an MRI scan, blood test. They even thought I was pregnant or that I was taking drugs, which I wasn't. And, you know, now I understand that I was having anxiety attacks and probably some other things that were happening because I was dissociating. So at that time, my dad was taking me to have all this kind of assessments to see what was happening while I was fainting. And I just became even more shy after those episodes. If somebody new would come and talk to me, I would get very anxious. I wouldn't know what to tell them, or I would come across as very rude because I was trying to cut the conversation short. I didn't want to interact with new people. It was stressful for me. So that's when I went to my first psychologist, who I never even mentioned what happened when I was little. And she said, well, you're having an adjustment disorder. It's because you just moved to the United States and you're just moving with your dad and you were always living with your mom. So I kind of buy into that, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I had an adjustment disorder. But I couldn't explain why I kept having that anxiety. I didn't even know it was anxiety. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew that I was always scared. I would always wake up and my heart was racing. I would have racing thoughts. I never knew what was happening with me. And that's something that I emphasize when I'm working with children. I teach them about emotions because you really don't know what's happening with you unless somebody is teaching you. If you grow up in a family where expressing feelings is not something that you do all the time, then for sure you're not going to know other feelings other than the basic sad, happy, and that's it. Right?
Yeah, just the simple, basic ones that people are just accustomed to associating emotions with. But there's so much other stuff, guilt, shame, resentment, that kind of thing.
So when I work with children, I like to explain to them about emotions because that's going to help them regulate them. And that's something that I lacked for so many, many years until I started going to graduate school. So, you know, in the process of me going to high school and then graduating, going to college, I had very unhappy relationships. I was with a guy for 6 years who was very verbally abusive. And then I had another boyfriend when I moved to San Antonio who he was verbally abusive, but more than verbally, he would like guilt trip me all the time. And since I was already dealing with shame and guilt, it was just very toxic for me. And I never share anything that had happened, other than with a few, maybe a couple of friends who were just like, they just listened to me. It wasn't like they were trying to help me sort out through my feelings. It was more, I'm listening to you. And in the process of doing that, I discovered how many other people have suffered from abuse. I mean, I would just share like bits and pieces, and then people would just tell me, oh, this happened to me, or I was raped when I went to the club, and, I had to have an abortion after that. And it was just so much need that I saw while going through my master's program. And I always wanted to work with teams, but it wasn't until I was by myself, because I didn't have any family in San Antonio, that I was by myself and going through my master's program that I realized how many people, including me, have the need to be healed, and who's going to be there to help them. So I became very, very interested in trauma, and I just wanted to know more about it. And it wasn't about like, how it changes the brain, or, how it affects the relationships, but it was more about how it affects the person. What are some of the thoughts that you have about yourself that, that in itself, it has so much power on how you're going to interact with other people.
Yes, very debilitating type of thoughts that go through the mind, and it impacts the body.
Right, it does. And so for me, it was the anxiety. So I started to, because I couldn't understand how to deal with my anxiety, I started to drink a lot. And that was my way of coping. And so that attracted other traumas from happening. So, I just kind of thought one day, I met my husband, and he's very sweet. He's very understanding. So he was kind of that balance that I needed. He comes from a family whose parents have been married for more than 30 years. They have some things like in all families, but they're very functional. So having that in my life, it just kind of helped me see things in a different perspective. And I just thought, I don't need to be dealing with all these feelings and these thoughts and these memories. I can work through it, and I can offer my kids a different life. So that's when I think I started working through my trauma. And I started, I went to some counselors, but for me, counseling, it's like finding the right pair of shoes. You need to find that person that is not going to fit too big or too small, but it's going to be perfect. And they're going to listen to you, and they're not going to judge you. And you're going to be able to put your heart and soul in the table, and they're going to help you sort out through all those things that you put on there. So
how old were you when you started to actually go through the therapy and started to work through this?
I'm going to say about 3 years ago, so I was 25, maybe 26, and I think that's around the time that I was getting married. And I did some work with my therapist, but I also found some other books that I could read, and I could do some exercises on my own at home, and then go back to my therapist and talk about how it was for me to go through that exercise. Like one of the ones I remember was writing a letter to a person that molested me. And, it was very hard to choose one because I'd had so many. But I think what happened at my dad's house was the most traumatic for me, because my dad walked into the room, and that's something I forgot to say. My dad walked into the room. The guy, I'm sure he had already left, and I just kind of went back to sleep. But I remember waking up, and my dad was crying right next to me, and he said, "Who did this to you?" And I guess my underwear was down, and he was coming in the room to lay down, because we would, him and my brother, we would sleep in the same bed, because we would just spend the weekends with him. So we didn't have our own room. So I think it was the most traumatic because of my dad's reaction. And then he asked me about it the next day, and I said, I don't know. So he kind of dropped it. And I think it's because you don't know how to deal with your child being molested. I mean, what do you do?
Yeah.
If your child is not talking, what are you going to do? All you can do is be there for them. So I don't blame him for doing that, because he has compensated in so many other ways, just the way that he's always been with me, so nurturing and caring. But I decided to write a letter to that person, and it was so liberating, but at the same time, I had to go back to that memory and to those feelings. But I can honestly say that exercise was, for me at least, it was one of the best things that I could have done. It just, I think after that, things just kind of starting to be released. And it's a process that it's long. I mean, it's not going to go away from one day to the next. You need to be working at it every day. But when you finally let go of some of those feelings, the process becomes easier. It's like when you lose a family member. The first couple of months are the hardest, but then the pain is still there. You just learn to live with it and handle it and remember the happy things that happened with that family member. So it's the same thing, I think, for me. I rather think about the happy memories when I used to travel with my dad, when, we used to be in family gatherings. I rather think about that now than the bad things that happened to me.
Yes, and I commend you too, and I think you bring up a really good point, is that you were trying to help yourself and you were finding other ways to kind of keep your healing going between your sessions.
Right, and that's very important. You do a lot of work in the sessions, but between the sessions is when you're going to have a lot of intrusive memories, you're going to have flashbacks. That's when you're really going to be dealing with all those feelings that you just brought out in the session.
Right. It's kind of like they're compartmentalized in these little closets within. And as you start opening these doors, it's like all of these like ghosts start coming out. And that could be a little scary sometimes. Yeah. And that's why it is so important, like you said before, finding the right fit for you, the right person that's going to make you feel really safe and comfortable. And I think individuals like yourself who have dealt with this personally, they really bring a deeper level sometimes of compassion, I feel. And it allows your clients to connect with you maybe more easily, than had you not. Is that something that are you able to share any of your own personal experiences, or is that not something you typically do in your sessions?
I've done it. I've done it with people who I think it's helpful to help them move from one thing that is very hard, or to build rapport. It's very important. I remember one of my first trauma clients that I had. I remember explaining to her, "Is this how you feel?" And then I would just remember how I felt. And I remember her asking, I hadn't even told her that I went through something. And she said, "Have you gone through something like I did?" And I just, she caught me off guard. And I was like, how would that help you? And she's like, well, it's just that you know so much about it. You must have had to go through it. And I was just like, oh, my God. So that was the first time that I had to decide, is self-disclosure right for this session? And so I did share with her. And I think it can, like you said, it can show compassion. It can show understanding. But it also helps the process of therapy. It's easier for people to express how they feel or what they've been through if they know that the person in front of them went through the same thing.
Yes, I notice the same thing in my sessions too, depending on the type of trauma, because I've been through lots of different types of trauma. And when something comes up, it's almost like, and I'm sure you feel the same way, where you just kind of intuitively can feel when you sharing is going to help them in some way, is going to help them on their healing journey. Then that's when we sort of open ourselves up to, and I do feel it makes a big difference. And they really appreciate that too, because all of us, one of the things that makes us human is our vulnerability. And I think a lot of people try to hide that. And when we're able to connect with people through our pain, it's a really beautiful thing, because I feel like whatever it may be, that when you have an opportunity to share a moment like that with someone, it brings healing for the both of you. It's almost as if as you start to realize these things, right, it takes the power away that it has over you. It has like a grip over your spirit, your essence. And all of this kind of helps you peel back, I guess, these layers of pain and like you said, these thoughts, so that you can finally step into your wholeness. And I know that's something that, I think that you're very passionate about this.
I feel like it also creates hope for people, because sometimes you're in a very dark spot and you're just saying, I'm never going to get out of this. And when you see somebody that has gone through similar things and they were able to make it, and now they're helping others, that opens up hope for that person. Wow, if that person could do it, I can do it too.
You mentioned that you got you married. How long ago did you get married?
I've been married for a little bit over 2 years.
Okay, and it sounds like he's a very loving man, which is beautiful, because like you said, part of your partnership has actually aided you in the healing. And how has it affected you sexually? Did it make you prude? Did you know what I mean? Like, how long before you started to feel comfortable with your sexuality, and how did you handle that with your partner?
I think for me, in that aspect, it really didn't have a lot of like a negative effect. I don't feel like I was ever scared of him touching me, or that I felt like, oh no, don't get near to me. I don't feel like I ever had that issue. The issue that I feel has been more present is that I am not able to be very open about what I want, because I feel like that could be seen as, like, what is this girl thinking? It just, I'm still working on that. I just don't feel comfortable saying those things.
Okay, and when you say, are you talking about like what you're needing specifically, like when you are being intimate, or you're saying in general sometimes using your voice can be difficult? In what way are you talking about?
I feel it's more in intimacy. I am not comfortable with sharing what I need in intimacy. I'm very vocal about other things, but that part I am not.
Okay. And, it's also beautiful that you recognize that, too, because, all of us are a work in progress. And the way trauma impacts people and their sexuality and or their relationships or how they are in their day-to-day life does vary. And so for you sharing this also kind of helps open people's eyes to the ways in which it can impact them that they may not be aware of, And it is important for us to feel comfortable letting our partner know what we want and what we need. And because, our sexuality is such a big part of our essence as a woman, And that's another reason why I think it's so important for all of us to heal this trauma, because in some capacity it does impact it. It does, you know what I mean? For everybody it's different, but it does have an impact.
And, there's an assessment that I do with children and teens right when I'm starting to see them for therapy. And there's a question in there that talks about, do you get upset when you see sexual things on TV, or when people talk about sexual things? And I think that's kind of how it impacted me. I feel very uncomfortable with sex scenes when we're watching a movie, or when, just something happens on TV and it's very full of sexual content. It just makes me feel very uncomfortable.
You were mentioning a lot of this, obviously, is what drove you into helping people. And one of the things that part of your training led you to work in facilities where it was, children, like the Children's Advocacy Center. And what was that like? I mean, I guess you were only dealing with children there.
Yes, I was only dealing with children. I think the youngest child that I worked with was 3 years old. So, I feel like my work there helped me heal a lot because I didn't get the help early on in life. And for me, that's very important. If you recognize or you know that your child has been through a trauma, they need help. They need to be with somebody that is going to guide them through the feelings that they're going to be experiencing. And not only your child, but you as a parent. Because, statistics show that if a child has been abused, their parents are more likely to have been abused themselves. So it might open a lot of wounds if you see that happening to your children. I would work with parents. I would work with the family, with the child. So that helped me heal. To see parents who truly care about their children, who would be very committed to taking them to counseling every single week for as long as it needed to happen. To having teenagers who were like, I'm okay. It wasn't abuse. I consented. And then seeing them go from that set of mind to, I was actually a victim, and that wasn't right, but I can move on from this. It was very helpful to me. I mean, it might sound kind of selfish, but it was very helpful. And I think having a therapist who is healing or who has healed already, I feel that that's more powerful than having somebody that is just listening to you, You need to have somebody that really understands.
Yes. And, you bring up a good point, too, because earlier you were mentioning that within your family paradigm, not talking about emotions was very standard, and that's like a cultural thing oftentimes. Right. And so you having this opportunity to work with the entire family is so crucial, too, because it does impact all of them. And for a parent who was not aware, and then they find out, there's a lot of guilt that they end up carrying too, and it's really important for them to heal that. So I think it's really awesome that you weren't just working with the kids, but that you're also kind of helping the entire family unit get through this.
Right, because there's a better chance for the child to move forward and heal from the trauma if the family is involved, if they understand what the child is going through. If they don't just see their anger as, rebellion, but they see it as, I'm angry because this happened to me, and I feel like I have no control over it. So if the parent is able to see that, that's going to help them to give their children the tools that they need, or give them the support that they need, or just be there for their child, but with understanding and allowing them to have those feelings and not get stuck in them.
Yeah, it's like it's teaching the parents how to create a safe space for these children to process what it is that they need to process. And it can be difficult for kids sometimes to see their parents carry angst and have those feelings, because then it almost like hinders their growth and their healing. Was there anything besides your therapy and I think you were saying books, was there any body work or anything like that you did? I know a lot of times when people are healing, they'll use the art to kind of like help them. Was there anything in the artistry area in terms of painting, dancing, yoga, or anything like that helped you?
I think with my anxiety, and recognize where it came from, meditation was very helpful. But definitely my faith. My family is Christian. I grew up in a Christian home. But fortunately, the divorce had a lot of consequences in our family life. So my mom stopped going to church, and I was kind of craving that. I wanted to know more about God. And I feel like as I grew older, I was like, it just kind of lost importance in my life until I got married, and I realized, it's hard work, and I need something to rely on. I need God. So going to church, praying, reading the Bible, asking God to help me heal and to give me the tools to heal. But currently, taking refuge in His Word and understanding what I am to Him. And, it just kind of makes me feel like there's a scripture in the Bible. I really don't remember exactly how it goes. But it says that anything that the devil meant for your harm, God will use it for your good. And I feel that's what happened in my life. All those things that I went through, those rough patches in my life, I'm using it now to help others. And I feel that's where God used it to my good, because I love counseling, I love psychology, and it was a perfect marriage to love counseling, and on top of that, use what happened to me to help others. So, I feel that as I was healing and I understood that, the trauma, the sexual abuse wasn't what defined me, but what God thinks about me and how much He loves me, to have taken me out of Ciudad Juarez and moved me to my dad's home, and, all those steps that, for you it feels like, they're taking me away from my roots. They're taking me away from people I know. I didn't even know how to speak English. I was in a whole different country where I didn't even understand their customs, their language, nothing. So it felt ugly to have been moved from that, removed from my roots. But at the same time, I thank God, because I don't know what would have happened to me. Around that time when I moved out of Juarez, there were a lot of females being murdered. There were a lot of documentaries done on what was happening in Juarez. Close to my middle school, they found a body of somebody that was killed. So really, I feel that I was taken out of a really bad situation and taken out of a city where I don't know if something would have happened to me if I hadn't left.
Right.
So, I think knowing that God has my back, and even though I don't see Him, I don't hear Him, I know He's there. That was very, very helpful to me.
That's beautiful. And what I love, too, is oftentimes when people have been through, live in a home where there's abuse or dealt with trauma, like sexual trauma, if they believed in God at all, they all of a sudden feel like, where were you? Like, you left me, you hurt me, They don't have a bigger understanding of what God is. And you always maintained that connection, and then later as you grew older, you leaned on it and nurtured it and realized how much it was actually helping you, your faith and your spirituality. And you're right, God never leaves us. It's always with us, even in difficult times. And now you can reflect back on your life, even my own self. When I look back on my life, it's like I totally understand why I dealt with all the trauma that I did, because, pain is not in vain when you can use it to help others. And that's exactly what you're doing with your life. And it's you're a very courageous woman. Like you said, thank goodness that you got moved out. And at the time, like you said, you're like, oh, why is this happening? I don't want this to happen. But now you realize, it was divine. All these things that happen in our life, there is divinity in it all. And so I just want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for all that you've been doing to help one person at a time, because that's kind of how I look at it. every individual matters. Every person is significant. We all have purpose here, and we all deserve to, we are loved, and so we deserve to be loved and to love to our fullest capacity. And that's why one of the reasons why I did this show is just to do my part. We can all do a little something to help each other. And so thank you for all that you've done and all the work that you'll continue to do, and I wish you many blessings. And I want to thank you for being a part of the sisterhood here at the Sacral Circle. Again, go ahead and tell them what the site is, or how they can find you or reach you.
So you can find me on Psychology Today. If you put in my name, Nidia Valadez, or you can go to my blog, Nidia vsinvictor.wordpress.com. And if you go to Psychology Today, you can email me. You can find my phone number there. I don't have a web page for my practice, but it's Spring Oaks Counseling. I am in San Antonio, Texas. So, if you need a free consultation and you're a local to San Antonio, you're welcome to give me a call. My phone number is area code 956-325-3046.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nidia. Many blessings to you. And thank you to our beautiful listeners for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the Sacred Stories podcast on iTunes, where you'll find other impactful, inspiring shows. Connect with me via our social media pages. You'll find us at the Sacral Circle. Your shares and likes are greatly appreciated because they help spread the love. If you have any questions about my coaching and healing services, visit my website at JanieTerrazas.com. As we say goodbye, always remember, know your worth and continue to love and value yourself wholeheartedly. Peace be with you.